Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. How's it going? Good morning. Good morning. I'm your host, David McCarricker. This is the Theory Underground, and today I'm doing an exegetical reading of Chapter 3 from For They Know Not What They Do. It's called Hegelian Language with two L's. So I don't know if we should say like Llanguage. But how you doing, everybody? Most people are probably not joining this morning who would normally join in the United States. So who knows? Maybe there's a chance that some of my friends in Europe are going to pop in. Oh my God, look at that. Andrew Parsons in the chat. Good to see you, Andrew. How you doing? What are you doing? Why are you awake? What time is it where you're at? Where I'm at, it is 6:11 right now. I am going to be doing a solo read unless someone from the forum joins. In the For They Know Not What They Do forum, Georgie, what's up? In the For They Know Not What They Do forum, there is a couple of things, actually. Why don't I just show you what I'm talking about? Let's put it up on the screen here. Boom. Exegetical readings go here is where I shared the link, so you'll be able to see this exegetical reading if you want. And then in the forum post called Group Exegetical Reading, I posted the link here so that anybody can join so long as they're in this course. Don't worry about this right here. This is a bug that only I see apparently, and it's something that I've been trying to get solved with the help of the programming support for a couple months. But the thing I want to kind of show you is if you go to the front, yeah, that double header is just weird. But if you go to the front page, theory-underground.com, and you take a look at it, if you click see all activity, you're able to see the conversations that you're able to see. You're not in all of the forums. You're not able to see all the forums. But if you click on forums and you're not registered with the website, you're only going to see this one so far, which is the public open forums, FAQ, meme stash, etc. That's kind of not really taking off very fast. But sometimes people do come over from the YouTube channel and, ask a question about a book or something like that. But right here, if you are in the For They Know Not What They Do course, you click on that. That's where you'll be able to see the exegetical readings, where you post them, but also where you post join links if you want people to join you, or where you can find other people to start direct messaging groups with. See? And then there you go. Now, you don't have to do exegetical readings to be a valuable contributing member of this group. A well thought out forum post takes more effort in a lot of cases. It's a lot easier for some of us to talk. And so Theory Underground is combating talking by prioritizing text, saying that first reading, then writing, then conversation. Without the first two, it's just talking. It's mere idle chatter. And I like to talk, which means that for the last decade of trying to learn theory, I get caught up in conversations that feel fun to be a part of, that go on for 3 or 4 hours, but afterwards I go, I didn't really learn anything except for like what that person's opinions are. But I don't know that person's opinions are more worthwhile than the actual concepts or essential texts from the history of philosophy and theory that I'm trying to get a basis in, that I've dedicated my life to, that I'm sacrificing everything for, and that I know a lot of you are as well. And so, yeah, it's almost like, yeah, we're against talking out here. We're against debate. We're for having conversation with a basis in text. If you haven't done that for 20 years, I don't want to hear from you, right? But if you want to have a basis in the text after having read it the first time and now you want to do an exegetical reading with me, or you want to do an exegetical reading yourself, I'm all ears. How you read that text, how you interpret it, I'm there for it because I will learn from your effort. You will learn from mine. Really quick, I'm going to actually share a link here on the side panel. Let's see. I'm going to actually play something as an intermission here right before I get going. What should I play? What should I play? I'm going to play my free Mikey ad. Here we go. Be right back.
We interrupt this conversation for a quick message from our sponsors. All of Theory Plebe's content has been demonetized and self-funded for over a year. Plebe and Mikey work in warehouses while using what little time with energy that remains to do what they love, theory. Part of Plebe's goals for 2022 is to focus on getting Mikey freed from wage labor. To free his time-energy from its reduction to labor power. Why? Because Plebe has learned more from Mikey than almost any professor or book, and if Mikey can get his time energy, then he would be able to teach real online courses and publish video essays and that backlog of books he is always being obstructed from finishing. If you were unaware, Michael had a special kind of working living arrangement that made it possible for him to focus on nothing but the study of philosophy for 6 hours per day. Not just leisure reading, but struggling to articulate the hardest and most revolutionary concepts in the life of the mind. Mikey's standard was this: if he could not explain it to a guy on a bar stool at the pub, then he did not understand it. But by the time Michael was ready to begin making his wealth of knowledge accessible through courses and books, tragedy struck. Now he has to work full-time and support his mother. That is why we must #free Mikey before we can free ourselves. Towards the end of this video, when Todd McGowan and Andrew of Master Signified Bodies both leave to go to bed, Michael Downs explains why Deleuze is an absolute genius. And then he breaks down what Heidegger means by being in a way that is more accessible and clarifying than anything you will ever find on the subject, anywhere else. Promise. If you think you have lots to learn from him, or that the world of theory would more generally benefit from freeing him from wage labor, then consider supporting at www.patreon.com. The dangerous may be. If you are one of the graduate students or professors in classrooms around the world who have found Michael's posts from the Dangerous Maybe blog helpful, then stop what you are doing and give a little back. He should have leisure time too. It will only help all of us. #free Mikey. Every dollar gets him closer to having his time-energy again. Thank you for listening to this message from our sponsors, by whom we of course mean you, once you have helped in the struggle to #free Mikey. P.S. When Mikey gets freed, he will solve the riddle of history, complete a system of German idealism.
Shelley couldn't do it. Victor couldn't do it. Reinhold couldn't do it. My mom couldn't do it. No one could complete the system of German idealism.
Explain the body without organs without dumbing it down. Write the most important book on consumerism in America, and teach courses that are introductory and graduate level alike.
Okay, I'm back. Welcome, everybody. I said it was going to be a solo run, but I think Nikki's going to be joining here in a moment. And so while I wait for her to catch up on the video so far before she hops back in, I'm going to, which, by the way, if you're watching this right now, Nikki, I did send you the link in the DM. Well, if you're watching this right now, then you'd just be able to go back and then catch up. But I just wanted to make sure she was able to catch up. So today we're going to be reading from Chapter 3, Hegelian Language. But I'm going to say a couple things about the last chapter, the wanton identity, which we read from yesterday. We started at section 2, which was the logic of remark. And that's where you get to that. I mean, this is the section where you get to that notorious paragraph. If you ever want to read some theory to somebody just to make their brain fizzle out, You just read from page 75. Here, let me actually pull it up on the screen. Let's see. Here we go. I think this is it. Huh? 75? No, 75. Here we go. How do we get from the mark, in brackets, marqué, how do we get from the mark to the remark? Why must every mark, every signifying trace, be remarked? Derrida's point of departure is the differential character of the texture of marks. A mark is nothing but a trace, a sheaf of features that differentiate it from other marks, in which this differentiality must be brought to its self-reference, in which every series of marks, as semic or semic bearers of meaning, must contain an additional topological movement by which the seme mark refers to what demarcates the marks, to the blanks between the marks that relate the different marks to each other. In short, in any series of marks, there is always at least one which functions as empty, a space of the inscription of marks. It is only through the gesture of remarking that a mark becomes mark, since it is only the remark which opens and sustains the place of its inscription. You all followed that easily, didn't you? That was fine, right? There was no problems following along with that, was there? I'm sure there wasn't. I'm sure that was just easy peasy. So, what the hell is he saying? Does anyone have an idea? Was anybody at the lecture last night who now feels like, oh, I actually get that part? Or are you confused? Because I think that it makes more sense now that I have read it multiple times and Mikey gave that lecture. But here, this is... Well, what am I saying? Sorry, I'm letting Nance into the call right now. And while I'm letting him into the call, I'm trying to see if I could just jump to the point in the lecture where Mikey was explaining it. But I just realized that the transcript is not yet available. So I was going to just type remark and see if I could jump to the portion where he was talking about it.
Here, one should reverse Kant's formula of the transcendental conditions of possibility. Every facilitator and hinderer, right? Okay. So the point for Žižek is that
I don't know. Nance, do you remember when it was?
Performs an activity that is pointless and superfluous.
When he's talking about the remark?
So this kettle logic is used by the defenders of speech, for example, Rousseau, since writing qua supplement is one, an inessential addition, and two, essential substitute or compensation.
What about Žižek's dialectical materialism?
Oh, that's another thing.
Particulars, and I mean.
All right, well, whatever. I was just killing time anyway, guys. Listen, here's the deal. Mikey did a great lecture last night. It was absolutely brutal, especially during the first half because there's so much to get through, but he did an excellent job really tying together what's going on here, which included, he had to actually who's like this, big name Derridian, who is a critic of Hegel, and what Derrida and Guichet, as well as Jean-Luc Nancy, as well as a lot of others, fail to understand is that their understanding of Hegel is, first of all, just wrong, but second of all, everything great in deconstruction is already there in Hegel. They just don't go the extra step that Hegel goes. So if you're curious about why that is, you will want to read chapter 2 of For They Know Not What They Do, and you'll probably be confused like I was, and so you'll be interested in the course. We're trying to make it so that people can audit the course for cheap, for people who aren't as invested in the long-term conversation that goes on the forum, people who just want to watch it, But for all practical purposes, though, that's what I'm going to say about that chapter. Now, while we wait to see if Nikki's going to join us or not, because I thought she was going to, Nance, I'm going to put you on screen here and ask you if there's anything you wanted to say about the previous chapter before we jump into the next one, chapter 3. Or the lecture. No.
I think other than the fact that he does repeat concepts in different, like he restates stuff differently so that it can kind of come into focus differently. Like he says stuff over and over again, but he has to say it over and over again because it matters. The way he's saying it differently matters.
Right. And I think you said bringing it into focus, which is a good way to say that as a photographer, right? But I actually see one of your awesome cameras in the background right there, I think, So, yeah, bringing it into focus. You can't bring something into focus without having a background against which you're foregrounding it, right? So that's first. But what's operative with the background foreground dynamic except for contrast, right? And so he has to say things different ways, say the same thing different ways, so that he can kind of zoom in, zoom out, and provide us like a sort of contrast, background, foreground. And that his whole project, he's always talking about inversion. And it's crazy because, I mean, you'll eventually, after reading him enough, you realize, wow, he's been kind of saying the same shit his whole life, just kind of trying to write it different ways. This is the text where he's most theoretically dense in a sustained way. Oh, yo, Nikki. Hey, Dave, check the Theory Underground chat when you get a chance. I've caught up, and there's an issue with the link. Oh, shit. Nikki's having an issue with the link. All right, well, Nikki, I know you're watching now, so welcome. We're going to try to get that figured out immediately. Well, now that we know Nikki's here, we can actually get to it. So, Nance, if you want to start reading from chapter 3, you can kick it off while I figure out how to get Nikki in here. And if I don't figure it out within the first, say, page, Nikki, I'll start a new chat and a new Zoom call and get you into that one. Because if you're having an issue accessing this one, that might be the solution. But I'll try to work something out immediately. Okay, let's go.
All right. Chapter 3, Hegelian Llanguage, with an eye to our gaze. How to do a totality with failures. Today's postmodern thought seems to be dominated by the alternative of dialectical totalization and dissemination. Is it possible to mediate the heterogeneous elements that we encounter in our experience, to posit them as ideal moments of a rational totality? Or are we condemned to an interplay of fragments that can never be totalized? The way one raises the question is, of course, far from neutral, since it clearly gives predominance to the second term of the alternative. Following the postmodern pop ideological topic on the end of big stories, it silently assumes that every attempt at rational totalizations is in advance doomed to failure, that there is always some leftover that eludes the totalizing seizure, and so on. The problem with this alternative, however, is not in the advanced choice it implies, but in the fact that it falsifies the choice by crucially misrepresenting the authentic Hegelian notion of a rational totality. Hegel knows very well that every attempt at rational totalization ultimately fails. This failure is the very impetus of the dialectical progress. His wager is located on another level. It concerns, so to speak, the squared totalization, the possibility of making a system out of the very series of failed totalizations, to enchain them in a rational way, to discern the strange logic that regulates the process by means of which the breakdown of a totalization itself begets another totalization. What is phenomenology? A spirit, ultimately, if not the presentation of a series of aborted attempts by the subject to define the absolute and thus arrive at the longed for synchronism of subject and object. This is why its final outcome, absolute knowledge. Oh no.
What happened?
Oh no, hold on, I lost my place.
That is the worst. I think I'm figuring it out. So I almost have a solution here. You found your place?
Yeah, I gotta figure out my tablet. It like auto rotates at the worst times.
Yeah, dude, I've been having some serious issues too with losing my place. And it's because if you look on the screen here, I like to click my middle mouse button to scroll because it's smooth. Whereas, like, it's not smooth if I use the other ways. But then sometimes it just goes, and then I'm like a couple pages away and I'm like, what just happened? Nikki, go ahead and try again. I think I got the solution here. I think you'll be able to get in right now. So just try the same link again. Yeah, because what happened, Nikki, was I tried to message you when you were in the waiting room, and I accidentally booted you, and that was totally not on purpose. And then that's why I just messaged you back on the DM on the site instead. And then I guess after you kick someone from the waiting room, they can't get back in. I didn't know that. And so I just went in and changed that setting for now so that you will be able to get back in. My bad. All right, so where are we?
Top of page 100, the absolute and thus arrive at the longed for synchronism of subject and object.
All right, and so people.
This is why its final outcome.
I was going to say people in the future watching this timestamp where we actually started, where Nance started reading. I just wanted to say that because otherwise I'll forget. All right, let's keep going.
This is why its final outcome, absolute knowledge, does not bring harmony, but rather entails a kind of reflective inversion. It confronts the subject with the fact that the true absolute is nothing but the logical disposition of its previous failed attempts to conceive the absolute. That is, with the vertiginous experience that truth itself coincides with the path towards truth.
Let's talk about it. So this is why its final outcome, absolute knowledge, does not bring about a finally found harmony, but rather entails a kind of reflective inversion. It confronts the subject with the fact that the true absolute is nothing but the logical disposition of its previous failed attempts to conceive the absolute. That is, with the vertiginous experience that truth coincides with the path towards truth. It's really, honestly, like probably one of the most succinct formulations we'll get from him as to what the absolute is in Hegel, right? Absolute knowledge, absolute knowing, absolute understanding. Like, these get talked about in different ways. I might be conflating categories even just saying that, but I think that that's, generally speaking, you know, Hegel is accused of being this thinker who thinks that absolute knowing is obtainable. If you just read through his system, you'll come out to the end having absolute knowing. And like the perfect example of this is the animal rights activist Peter Singer, the popular utilitarian who has some edgy standard utilitarian takes, as a lot of utilitarians do, because they're usually for, they want to reduce harm or pain and increase pleasure. And so, but for groups, which means like, if it's going to affect a small group negatively for the benefit of the greater group, so be it. But he applies this rationale to animals, and so he's controversial in a lot of ways. And so if you're interested in that, definitely check out his Practical Ethics. But his book on Hegel, his little tiny book on Hegel, basically says that Hegel's project is a failure. And this isn't just a book on Hegel. He wrote the very short introduction to Hegel. There's a whole series called A Very Short Introduction. I think that they come out through Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. And there's 300 books in the series probably. There's a very short introduction to postmodernism, a very short introduction to feminism, a very short introduction to Immanuel Kant, a very short introduction to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, for some reason, they allowed Peter Singer to write a short little essay that's supposedly an introduction to Hegel, even though that's not his area of expertise. And he writes that Hegel's project is a failure. Why? It is a failure because Hegel supposedly thinks that by reading the Phenomenology of Spirit, you will reach absolute knowing. And so just reading this text will bring you to absolute knowing, and world historical spirit will culminate in the moment or whatever, and there'll be this breakdown between all of these contradictions, and everything will be unified and harmonious, and the end of history will be achieved. That's kind of the picture he paints, and it's sad because that's a lot of people's introduction to Hegel. And really, Žižek's made an entire career out of saying that's not true, that's not the case. And Žižek is very well known. Did Peter Singer even bother to say, this is called into question or problematized by Slavoj Žižek? No, he just acts like Slavoj doesn't exist. And so the point is, now we reread this one more time. This is why the final outcome of absolute knowledge does not bring about a finally found harmony, but rather entails a kind of reflective inversion. It confronts the subject with the fact that the true absolute is nothing but the logical disposition of its previous failed attempts to conceive the absolute. That is, with the vertiginous experience, the truth itself coincides with the path towards truth. The process is part and parcel to the thing itself. That is dialectics. The process is part and parcel to the thing itself. They are inextricable. There is no truth, upper T truth. There's no such thing as upper T truth without the process of subjects on that path to truth, failing to arrive. The history of philosophy often gets taught in introductory courses as though it's, this person thought they had it all figured out. They were wrong. Throw them out. This person thought they had it all figured out. They were wrong. Throw them out. This person, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually you get to someone that's like, well, now these people are in the conversation. Maybe one of them is right. The reason someone like Karl Jaspers thinks that they all exist in this sort of timeless dimension in dialogue with one another is because all of them are getting at things that the other ones aren't, right? And so that's the path towards truth in this dialectical sense. It's like Kant is not just a failure, so you throw him out. No, his failure teaches us more than any living contemporary's failures, right? That goes for every great philosopher. If you really want to think on the shoulders of giants, then you go to the best failures. Because guess what? All of your contemporaries and peers, they're all failing too. They just don't realize how much they're failing, right? We don't have that kind of perspective to really register to what degree they failed. All right, so that's my little speech. I was hoping to kill some time here so Nikki could join, but Let's see. I'm going to check the chat. She's triple checked. All right, Nance. I'm going to boot you. Or actually, could you just leave? And I'm going to start a new conversation, and I'll send you both the link for the new one. Sorry about this, everybody. All right. Exegetical reading take 2. Let's do this. Save. Sorry, everybody. My God, what a mess. Did not mean for that to happen. Nikki, I really am sorry. This must be very frustrating. I did not do that on purpose. So I'm sending you the link, and now I'm sending Nance the link, and now I'm starting it. Hop on in when you can. All right. Connecting. I love that some people are actually here early in the morning. This is really cool. Early morning gang. What up? We got Andrew Parson listening from work. That's the coolest thing ever. By the way, Andrew said when I read that section on page 75, he said, yes, it hurt. Oh, and Dan's in the chat. What up, Dan? Said, I think it was around here that I started to appreciate how the retroactive action of the quilting point works. Dis make me much angry, says, and that's Nikki. Oh, we've got you in the chat. I'm not going to bother reading you. You're here in the flesh. Welcome.
Hello.
Nikki, I'm so sorry. Do you forgive me?
It's fine.
Cool.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, you sound crystal clear.
Awesome.
Well, everybody, this is Nikki. Nance has been more of a regular. Nikki has been a regular in the class, but hasn't appeared on stream before. So would you like to introduce yourself really quick, Nikki?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about myself, but you'll probably learn more later as I get familiarize myself with Theory Underground and get to know everyone better. So yeah, I love philosophy. I'll start with that.
That's perfect.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Cool. And Nance, I thought you joined. I thought Nance joined in here. Maybe he's not going to be able to get in anymore. Maybe Zoom is throttling me, and only 2 people are allowed at a time, and that's the real issue. Whatever. So we're gonna get back to it. I'll just start reading. Usually, I don't know if you've watched the previous exegetical readings, Nikki, but usually I just read up until I feel like a weight on my conscience that says I better say something about this, or I'm really fucking just narrating. And if I just narrate, then we're breaking copyright. So I definitely want to do exegetical stuff as we go. But also, obviously, like, there's this added pressure to, like, the whole point of it is to hystericize myself and be like, do I know what's going on here? Most of the time I don't, which is why I keep silent. But I'll read a few paragraphs. If you want to read, you can, or we can just both talk about it.
I would love to. I have a few format questions, very quick ones. Should I open up the PDF on my end and read from that? Would that be the best way? And number 2 is, can I give commentary at the end of like sentences, at the end of paragraphs, or should I wait until the end of pages to do it? Like, what's your preference?
Normally, it's going to be... It's a ratio. It's a matter of ratio. So, like, we'll try to do something like 70% reading time and 30% talking time. And so if 70% of the time you've been reading, you want to kind of, do an exegesis on any sentence you want, go for it, right? But the main thing we're trying to keep a balance of here is that ratio. Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. All right, let's get to it, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, and as far as the answer to the other question, I would have your own document open. You can definitely read along with what. Here, I'll share the screen. Sorry, you should be able to see what I have on screen here. That way, you don't technically need to, but let's see. This will do it. See, now you're going to be able to see. Yeah, that's what we normally do. All right, so, but the only reason to have it ready to hand so that you could read off of it is like if one of you is reading and I like step away and I'm listening and I'm not scrolling, that could fuck you over. So, all right. So, similar misunderstandings are usually aroused by the Marxist notion of the class struggle. True, class struggle is the totalizing moment of society, its structuring principle. This, however, does not mean that it is a kind of ultimate guarantee authorizing us to grasp society as a rational totality. The ultimate meaning of every social phenomenon is determined by its position within the class struggle. The ultimate paradox of the notion of class struggle is that society is held together by the very antagonism, split, that forever prevents its closure in a harmonious, transparent, rational whole, by the very impediment that undermines every rational totalization. Although class struggle is nowhere directly given as a positive entity, it nonetheless functions, in its very absence, as the point of reference enabling us to locate every social phenomenon, not by relating it to class struggle as its ultimate meaning, as its transcendental signified, but by conceiving it as an other attempted to conceal and patch up the rift of the class struggle, to efface its traces. What we have here is the typical structural dialectical paradox of an effect which exists only in order to efface the causes of its existence, of an effect which, in a way, resists its own cause. This seems very important, and like we're moving into new territory, so I'm just curious if either of you have a take on what is he saying?
I can go for it. I've got lots of takes on different parts of what he's saying, but what I found really interesting is that I've highlighted the parts that you've also highlighted in my own separate reading of this, which is really cool. I actually really like that. That's good positive affirmation for myself. For here, what I find, I guess I'll start with what I find interesting, then we can talk about what we decide about it, and I'll slowly learn what's the best way to go about this. But let's see. I really like the part that starts, what is the phenomenology of spirit, ultimately, if not the presentation of a series of aborted attempts by the subject to define the absolute and thus arrive at the longed-for synchronism of subject and object. This is why its final outcome, absolute knowledge, does not bring about a finally found harmony, but rather entails a kind of reflective inversion. It confronts the subject with the fact that the true absolute is nothing but the logical disposition of its previous failed attempts to conceive the absolute, that is, with the vertiginous experience that truth itself coincides with the path towards truth. I just find that such an amazing part of this overall reading. I think from the past, this is the third chapter now, and from the other two chapters, this section stands out to me. And I think that Žižek here really showed that in terms of the Hegelian concept of progress, in terms of the dialectical view, it isn't something that you're going to get to. There's not a specific static point, right? Because he does say that truth itself coincides with the path, specifically the path towards truth.
Exactly.
And a path implies that you're constantly on that journey towards truth. So the dialectical process, the Hegelian dialectic, is truth itself, and that also lends you towards getting towards more truth. And I think that that's something that does also comment on some, common understandings of how philosophy is generally done. And I wanted to definitely point out that section. And also the totalizing moment of society of its structuring principle. When he talks about class struggle, that's really interesting. And
that's
I have a
the
lot
part
to say about it, but I want to hear you guys too.
Thank you. I feel like that's the part we're moving into here. So so is he saying that capitalism is not a rational totalization, that its class structure actually defies rational totalization, and that the idea of a rational whole where everything's harmonious, is he saying that a society couldn't exist that way? Is he saying that a society can only be held together through class antagonisms? Because he says the ultimate paradox of the notion of class struggle is that society is held together by the very antagonism split that forever prevents its closures in a harmonious, transparent, rational whole, by the very impediment that undermines every rational totalization.
I don't think he's saying it couldn't exist. I think he's saying it's what holds our current society together. I don't think he's making like a prescriptive statement, but I think he is describing, like, that is the essence of capitalism, while at the same time saying it's also wrong to make that your ultimate lens, your ultimate like the disingenuous Jordan B. Peterson version of class struggle, how Marxists are always simplifying and boiling things down. Like I think he's saying, like, it makes up the essence of what we currently have, but also it's not the silly, small, smooth-brained version of what it could be.
And so this last half of the paragraph then is what I would want to zoom in on. So does one of you want to read it, and then we'll talk about it?
If that's good, but I can give my take as well.
Yeah.
I think that
Yes.
I would actually, I do feel that Žižek is being a bit more strong with his language here and being a bit more suggestive. And I think that he is being very clear. There's two specific sentences that really indicate that there actually can't really be a specific point of a totalization, and a totalization I envision as the harmonious structure of something that's completely envisioned, completely outlined, and completely static and perfect and harmonious in that way. Because he says actually here that the ultimate paradox of the notion of class struggle is that this society is held together by that very antagonism split that forever prevents its closure in a harmonious, transparent, rational whole. So I think that specifically the language that forever prevents its closure in a harmonious, transparent, and rational whole, that definitely indicates that and Žižek is being very, I think, very suggestive here and very strong in his language and saying that they're really, you forever are prevented from actually getting to that point. It's not really possible, right? And from my understanding of Žižek as well, he's very strong on that concept of negation actually creating our understanding of what that thing is, right? And that's how our society and even the notion of class itself exists, is that the fact that there are these different things, and if there are these different things, there are going to be these differences created that cause these contradictions, right? So and it even says so at the very last sentence here. I can start reading the whole thing, but the last one, he says there's a structural dialectical paradox of an effect that exists only in order to efface the causes of its existence, of an effect in which way it resists its own cause, which I think is also quite indicative here.
Yeah, to really back that up, I highlighted that society because the ultimate paradox of the notion of class struggle is that society is held together. He didn't say that society. He didn't say that capitalist society. He said society. So he's saying the rational totality of a harmonious whole is a non-society. So he might still be in favor of a non-society. Maybe he's got a definition of society that he wouldn't want. But I think that going off of everything I understand about him, I think he's for some kind of a communism that is contradictory and non-whole, right? I think that that's the case. But I only wanted to kind of really get caught in the weeds on this paragraph before really diving into this following section, because I feel like that's what's at stake, is a critique of almost everybody who calls themselves communists, because obviously he is one, but he also doesn't like the beautiful soul tendency. He also doesn't like the utopian socialist tendency. He doesn't like the naive anarcho-kitty tendency, which is just like, oh, well, you know, hunter-gatherers in some societies had a harmonious whole according to our conception of it, and therefore we can at the level of civilization. And he's like, no, I think he's saying no. So well, let's go on. So I'll read a couple more paragraphs here, but yeah, go. What's that?
No, I was just saying he also says Mother Nature is a dirty bitch as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, obviously, this is the real, right? He's trying to brush up on the real, which is, you know, at the level of society where we romanticize nature, we don't like to think about some of the stuff nature does, right? In other words, class struggle is real in the strict Lacanian sense, a hitch, an impediment which gives rise to ever new symbolizations by means of which one endeavors to integrate and domesticate it. The translation of the class struggle into the organic articulation of the members of the social body, both of those in scare quotes, meaning they're not real members and it's not a real social body in any normal sense of those words. So now I'll reread that, but without the parenthetical. In other words, class struggle is real in the strict Lacanian sense, a hitch, an impediment which gives rise to ever new symbolizations by means of which one endeavors to integrate and domesticate it, but which simultaneously condemns these endeavors to ultimate failure. Class struggle is therefore, if one refers to the Hegelian opposition of substance and subject, the subject, not the substance, of history. Right? So class struggle is the subject, not the substance, of history. Substance is the universal qua positive space of mediation of its particular content, the receptacle containing all its particular wealth, whereas the subject is the universal insofar as it entertains a negative relationship towards its particular content, the unfathomable limit that forever eludes its particular effects. In short, the Marxist version of the Hegelian motto that the absolute is to be conceived not only as substance but also as subject is that history is to be conceived not only as the progression of the economic basis, the economic base, the dialectic of productive forces and the relationship of production, but also as class struggle. I kind of want to just make sure I'm following here. So there's substance and there's subject and there's universal and there's particular. And is he saying one occupies the position of universal and the other occupies the position of particular, but they're both, what is, the substance is the universal qua positive space of mediation of its particular content, the receptacle containing all its particular wealth, whereas the subject is the universal insofar as it entertains a negative relationship towards its particular content. Right, so the subject is subject insofar as it's not its particularities, right? That's, I'm short, I'm white, I'm wearing glasses, I'm 35 years old. These are particulars. We can all list off our particular positive attributes. We could also list off our negative attributes. I'm also not tall. I'm also not wearing glasses, right? These are all the negative attributes. And the point is that these are particular attributes that we could use to characterize me, but I am subject insofar as I'm not those particulars. The subject is what escapes those particulars. The substance is the mediation of its particular content, the receptacle containing all its particular wealth, right? So what is that? What does that mean, though? I get the part about the subject, but what is he saying about the substance? Substance is the universal qua-positive space of mediation. We'll keep reading, but kind of just keep that as a keeper. We'll come back to it, okay? Because he'll probably clarify. And obviously then the bigger question is, how does class struggle factor in here as this relation between substance and subject, right? So if it's a subjective history, it's not all these particular things. I mean, he is talking about identity politics. That's kind of what we left out of the previous paragraph, which is that all of these other struggles are not just expressions of class struggle, but they're the positive phenomenon that are obfuscating this negative subject of history, right? So that's why you can't just add class as an identity. That's why you can't just be like, well, as a working class person. No. You can't do that. It's not an identity. That's not the point. The unfathomable limit that forever eludes its particular effects. In short, the Marxist version of the Hegelian motto that the absolute is to be conceived not only as substance but also as subject is that history is to be conceived not only as the progression of the economic basis, the dialectic of productive forces and the relationship of production, but also as class struggle. The kernel of the real, encircled by failed attempts to symbolize it, is radically non-historical. History itself is nothing but a succession of failed attempts to grasp, conceive, specify this strange kernel. This is why, far from rejecting the approach that psychoanalysis is non-historical, one has to acknowledge it fully and thus simply transform it from a reproach into a positive theoretical proposition. Therein consists the difference between hysteria and psychosis. Hysteria/history is more than a trivial word game. Hysteria is the subject's way of resisting the prevailing, historically specified form of interpolation or symbolic identification, right? You're being told you are these things, and the hysteric's like, no, I'm not, and who the fuck are you? Hysteria means failed interpolation. It means that the subject, in the name of that which is in him more than himself, the object in himself, refuses the mandate which is conferred on him in the symbolic universe. As such, it falls conditional within the dominant form of symbolic identification. That is, it is its reverse. While psychosis, the maintenance of an external distance from the symbolic order, is unhistorical. That is, on the level of psychosis, it is not difficult for us to pose equality between psychotic outbursts reported in classical sources and contemporary clinical cases. The act qua psychotic in this sense is ahistorical. However, an ahistoric kernel of the real is present also in history/hysteria, the ultimate mistake of historicism, in which all historical content is relativized, made dependent on historical circumstances, that is to say, of historicism as opposed to historicity, is that it evades the encounter with the real. All right. Do either of you have something you would like to say about the distinction between historicism and historicity, and psychosis and hysteria here? Because psychosis, he's saying, is non-historical. It's just the same in every symbolic order. I think what he's saying is the psychotic was not able to kind of internalize or take on castration. The psychotic person is not a neurotic like obsessives and hysterics. Like you and me, like all of us are probably in Freudian terms neurotics, unless we have some serious issues that we need help, from. But even then we need help, because neurosis is it has a lot of various forms, but the two major ones, there's a lot of manifestations of these two major ones. From what I understand, it's going to be obsessives and hysterics. Like that's the two main kinds of neurotics. We're neurotic because there's repression at work, and so what we tend to focus on, not what's repressed, is either objects or people. The hysteric focuses on people and relations, whereas the obsessive focuses on objects, right? Now, men are overrepresented in the obsessive side and women on the hysteric side. And there's, this is not an essentialism. The point is just that there's like this overrepresentation. And obviously there might be historical contingent reasons for that. But the basic thing is that's why normies say, and when I say normies, I mean normies, like boomer normies say, well, men focus on things, women focus on people. So that's obviously not true in every case, and we're usually a mixture of these things, but it's a matter of degree. And so what I'm saying is, what I understand is that hysteric in this case is being juxtaposed to the psychotic because the hysteric's a good extreme opposite of the psychotic. The hysteric has not rejected the no of prohibition from law. In fact, it's the hysteric's entire existence is determined by having internalized the no, but then challenging it, questioning it. So it's not being rejected, or it's being challenged by the hysteric. The hysteric challenges the master's discourse, but the psychotic doesn't challenge this shit. The psychotic just isn't integrated into the symbolic in a way that says, no, I could take a knife and peel your face off and I wouldn't feel anything except for a vague curiosity and a kind of exhilaration, maybe even perhaps. Right? Now that's an extreme example, but that's what I think is going on here. I'm obviously very confused about the clinical structures, and I expect that Mikey will unpack this in the next lecture. So, we have a lot to look forward to there. Now, historicism versus historicity. The act quasi-psychotic in this sense is ahistorical, right? The psychotic act in every society, it's kind of similar, right? The similarity is pronounced. It's always this inability to integrate into or have any sort of conscience revolving around the big other and the superego of that symbolic order, not having been able to take on prohibition. However, an ahistoric kernel of the real is present in Hysteria, history. The ultimate mistake of historicism, in which all historical content is relativized. So when we think of historical relativists, that's historicism. Think of it as an ideology. That's why it says ism there. So, because atheism, right? Leftism. It's an ideology. So what the ism indicates that there is an ideology of relativism, of historical relativism afoot when he says historicism. And there's a kernel of the real in this. And what is that? The ultimate mistake of historicism, in which all historical content is relativized, made dependent on historical circumstances, that is to say, of historicism as opposed to historicity, is that it evades the encounter with the real. So I think historicity is, yes, everything is historically contingent and contextual, and we have to think, we can't be presentists, which is really easy to do when you're online and you're just reading books from 150 years ago. You just act like things haven't changed, right? You don't have to think about how things have changed. So that would be historicity, the historicity of our embodied subjective experience right now, right? But that's not the same thing as historicism, which is just like, oh, well, it's all relative. We can't actually say anything about anything, really, because it's all just historically relativized, right? So he's trying to say historicity is the big-brained approach, historicism is the ideological approach. When I originally read this, I didn't know for sure, so talking it out really helped here. So does one of you want to read a few paragraphs here?
I'll go for it. Let us take the usual attitude of the university discourse toward the great masters of thought of our century, towards Heidegger, toward Lacan. Its first compulsion is to carry out an arrangement of their theoretical edifices into phases. Heidegger, being in time in contrast, or Heidegger 1 being in time in contrast to Heidegger 2, thought of being. Phenomenologically Hegelian Lacan of the 1950s, then structuralist Lacan, then the Lacan of the logic of the real. In such an arrangement, there is, of course, some pacifying effect. The thought is rendered transparent, properly classified. But we have nevertheless lost something with such a disposition into phases. We have actually lost what is crucial, the encounter with the real. We have lost, with Heidegger, the fact that Heidegger's various phases are only so many attempts to grasp, to indicate, to encircle the same kernel, the thing of thought, which he constantly tackles, dodges, and returns to. The paradox is thus that historicity differs from historicism by the way it presupposes some traumatic kernel which endures as the same, non-historical. And so various historical epochs are conceived as failed attempts to capture this kernel. The trouble with the alleged Eurocentricity of psychoanalysis is homologous. Today, it is a commonplace to draw attention to the way Freud's myth in Totem and Taboo is based on the Eurocentric anthropology of his time. The anthropologies on which Freud relied were unhistorical projections of the modern patriarchal family and society into primeval times. It was only on this basis that Freud could construct the myth of the primeval father. A breakthrough was only later achieved with Malinowski, Mead, and others who demonstrated how sexual life in primitive societies was organized in a completely different way, how we cannot therefore talk about an Oedipus complex, how inhibition and anxiety were not associated with sexuality. Things thus appear clear. We know where we are, where the primitives are. We have not reduced the other, we have preserved its diversity. Nevertheless, such historicizing is false. In the simple distinction between our own and past societies, we avoid calling into question our own position, the place from which we ourselves speak. The fascinating diversity of the other functions as a fetish, by means of which we are able to preserve the unproblematic identity of our subjective position. Although we pretend to historically relativize our position, we actually conceal its split. We deceive ourselves as to how this position is already decentered from within. What Freud called the Oedipus complex is such an unhistorical, traumatic kernel, the trauma of prohibition on which the social order is based. Okay, what Freud called the Oedipus complex is such an unhistorical, traumatic kernel, and the miscellaneous historical regulations of sexuality and society are none other than so many ways, in the final analysis always unsuccessful, of mastering this traumatic kernel. To understand the other means to pacify it, to prevent the meeting with the other from becoming a meeting with the real that undermines our own position. We come across the real as that which always returns to its place. When we identify with the real in the other, that is to say, when we recognize the deadlock, hindrance, because of which the other failed, our own hindrance, that which is in us more than ourselves. Much more subversive than entering the spirit of the past is thus, in contrast, the procedure by which we consciously treat it anti-historically, reduce the past to the present. Brecht made use of this procedure in The Affairs of Mr. Julius Caesar, where Caesar's rise to power is presented in 20th century capitalist terms. Caesar is concerned with stock market movements and speculation with capital. He organizes fascist-style, spontaneous demonstrations of the lumpenproletariat, and so on. Such a procedure could be brought to self-reference when the contemporary image of the past is projected into the past. So, today, pre-Socratic times are known only in fragments which have survived a turbulent history. We thus inadvertently forget that Heraclitus and Parmenides did not write fragments, but long, verbose philosophical poems. So it would really be some kind of subversive philosophical humor if we were to represent Heraclitus, let us say, as saying, I can't write any good fragments today. Or, on another level, the unknown sculptor of Milos saying, I can't break the arm off my Venus today. Relying on a similar reductionist, unhistorical procedure, Adorno's and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment reads the Odyssey retroactively from the experience of contemporary technical instrumental reason. Of course, such a procedure is unhistorical. However, precisely through the feeling of the absurd, which it awakens in us, it opens actual historical distance to us. Just as with Hegel's claim, the spirit is a bone, where the real effect of the absurd contradiction is the discord that it awakens in the reader.
I'm gonna step aside. I as a general rule, I can always hear when I step aside. To get some more coffee. I'm curious what you both make of these examples, because whenever Žižek uses examples, they're supposed to make whatever he's talking about more accessible or intuitive. But for me, and maybe he wouldn't say that. I think for actually what he would say is it's just an opportunity for him to exercise his ideas against some examples. I don't think it's so much for pedagogical reasons, right? But some people do find it pedagogically enlightening whenever he does this. I usually don't have the reference. I don't have the level of culture necessary to know about Brecht's The Affairs of Mr. Julius Caesar. This is the first time I've heard of it. I don't have enough culture to know of the Odyssey itself, right? Like, I wasn't raised on pagan religion. I was raised on the King James Bible. You could call that a kind of culture, but because it's, whatever. My point being, the Dialectic of Enlightenment, I've read parts of it, but do you guys, even if you haven't read, Heraclitus and Parmenides or these other texts, can you at least see what he's doing with these examples? Does it make sense to you what he's doing with these examples? And can you maybe, whether you can contextualize the literature or not, like, can you at least try to make sense of what is he doing with this example? And then I'll be right back.
Hello, Nance. How are you doing?
Outstanding. How are you?
Great. All right. I like the I do like when he uses examples that I actually understand. I do know about Heraclitus and Parmenides. I know a little bit about Mr. Julius Caesar and the Odyssey, and a little bit about the Dialectic of Enlightenment. Not enough to really get into that, but what really ignited the interest in me, which was very actually, it was like almost like double ironic in some way, was the last parentheses that says, just as with Hegel's claim, the spirit is a bone, where the real effect of the absurd contradiction is the discord that awakens in the reader. Like, because I remember seeing so many jokes about that line from Hegel, and just seeing it here still actually made me smile. So I think Dave wants us to talk about and illustrate the benefits, potential drawbacks potentially of what is being done here with Žižek's examples. And I really like when he uses examples that entertain me, because sometimes I think he's not one of the worst writers, but it can get monotonous sometimes, and I think that this just really helps lighten it up, and it actually gives me a reason sometimes to continue reading when I'm a bit discouraged, because I actually do look forward to some of the funny moments in his readings. As lame as that might sound, I could always go for comedy somewhere else, but actually Žižek is not that bad, and you actually learn something from it.
Yeah. I enjoy feeling lost, which Žižek always makes me do, but most of his examples lead me off on other tangents that feel irrelevant. And sometimes if you push on then you get that validation. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're just like, oh, that's just me. But sometimes it doesn't make sense until several pages later. You're like, oh, there it is. I don't know. When I'm reading this, it makes me think like it's just another example of historicism rather than looking at things in context. And like we can't escape our position. Like we can't look at things from any other perspective than where we are right now. But that doesn't mean you can't try to be objective.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say here. And I don't remember where exactly I got this from. I believe it could have been said by Žižek, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there. The thing that I find really interesting is that let me actually try to find it. Did I lose it? Let's see here. Yeah, no, it's the point of like what you said about not being able to see any framework besides the present. I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly what he's saying. It might be what he's trying to get at, but there was something that I highlighted a bit higher up about that is it was the last sentence in one of the above paragraphs. It says that is to say of historicism as opposed to historicity, that it evades the encounter with the real. And
Yeah.
you know, like I would assume that Žižek, you know, being a Lacanian would kind of go towards, okay, let's kind of try to, you can never actually get to truly that thing, right? But you should try to you should try to use a process that doesn't evade that, at least the correct structure, right? So historicity would be something he would condone instead of historicism. And one thing that I did learn was also that you can't really, it's like history is something, and I think Žižek said it somewhere, but like history is something that like you can kind of almost historicize the past from the present. So you're kind of almost like looking backwards, and that looking backwards kind of creates a thing that like allows you to see the present as well, but it kind of has this weird back and forth thing. But yeah, like I would like to hear more about what you think about this as well as we go on.
I think here listening to you both has been helpful to me. So I when I got back after having listened to you both, I gave it a reread here, and so I think probably the most crucial sentence is the one I've highlighted, which says such a procedure. What is he referring to? He's referring to rewriting Julius Caesar as a modern day capitalist fascist. Such a procedure could be brought to self-reference. That's where it gets confusing. What does he mean by that? Could be brought to self-reference when the contemporary image of the past is projected into the past. Mm-hmm. And then he gives a really good example of that. My God, like it actually escaped me on the first three readings of this, honestly. The first three, like, because I read this book like a few months ago, and then I'm now rereading it, and it didn't click until just now. But yeah, Heraclitus and Parmenides did write long, sprawling poems, like epics, like dialogues, like, you know, like Homer or Plato, right? But all we have remaining is fragments of them. So imagine somebody who doesn't understand the historical context of what's present to us now. What's present to us now are fragments. What's not present? What's absent? Well, it's all the gaps that they wrote that are missing. Well, if you just read what we have now as a presentist, and then you project onto history as a historical relativist kind of presentist, you're just going to be like, you write a story where they're just like, I like got ADHD, man. I just can't like write anything but fragments. These are basically just tweets that I'm firing off into the void. Like, no, they're not writing fragments. They're writing like these epics, but we forget that because we take what we see today for granted, and so we take the fascist style, quote unquote, spontaneous, meaning probably manufactured, demonstrations of the lumpen proletariat, which is say like also gets called the underclass. We take these spontaneous demonstrations of the lumpen proletariat as though like, oh yeah, that's how it is whenever we see someone in history doing something similar. As though the way fascism works in the 20th century is somehow like a trans-historical phenomenon. No, it's not. It's uniquely based in a mass society. Like nation states didn't exist the way they do now. So it just doesn't make sense to make these comparisons, you know? And actually this kind of gets to like probably the most crucial thing we've been harping on at Theory Underground in streams, in lectures for the last like, I don't know, especially for the last like 3 to 5 months is like, everyone likes to make comparisons. Oh, this is like that. That's like this. This is like that. That's like this. No, it's not. It's also not like that. You want to say that, and that, you know, obviously to some degree you're making associations that can be useful as a sort of crutch, but you've also kind of got to get over it. And so that's where like the chat last night got really distracting, is like constant comparisons being drawn. But the problem with constant comparisons is they erase the contrasts. And comparisons without contrasts is just looking at everything and saying, all cows are black when it's nighttime, right? We need contrast, we need negation. And so if you want to say this is similar to a thing in Eastern philosophy, good. Now you have to write me 6 extra paragraphs about what's different if you don't want to erase otherness, if you don't want to orientalize and appropriate otherness to the same. Right? Reducing the other to the same is the movement of totalization itself. And it's what Nance referred to earlier as smooth-brained. So that's not to say don't draw the comparison. It's to say draw out the contrast after you've made the comparison. And that can be a formula for writing reading reflections. That can be a formula for publishing in academic journals if you actually see a future in that. Like most of us aren't doing that kind of work, but if whatever you do, always keep in mind, whenever you see someone drawing comparisons but they're not doing contrast, it's sophomorism. Cool. And that's actually just a sort of stump speech or a rant that I've been meaning to make more clear, because we've talked about it in like 10 other situations, but we've not. I feel like what I just said is the most succinct version of it, and it's really like a lot of people's critiques that have finally gelled together. Mikey's the one who probably said it in private to me most succinctly, and now I'm kind of regurgitating. But it really kind of puts the finger on what's occurring. It's like, you say this is the same as that. It's like, yeah, but could we actually talk about how Julius Caesar was historically unique? What was the historicity of Julius Caesar? Because if we don't know what the historicity of Julius Caesar is, then we don't know what the historicity of Adolf Hitler is. Or people I don't like totalitarianism. Joseph Stalin and Hitler, they're both totalitarians. Cool, we can definitely draw comparisons. But if you can't write me a paper about the fundamental and irreconcilable differences, shut the fuck up, right? Like that's the basic idea there. I do think that that's what he's doing. So like this, I didn't realize that that's what's going on in this section, but now I think that is. So applying it lastly to Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectic of enlightenment, they have a similarly reductionist on historical procedure when they read the Odyssey retroactively from the experience of contemporary technical instrumental reason, right? They're projecting the contemporary, modern, technical, instrumental reason of our times back onto the Odyssey. It's like, okay, well, are you also going to do that back onto ancient Babylon? Are you also going to do that back onto the ancient Aztecs and the Mayans? What about ancient China? Are you going to literally act like they all had factories? Are you going to act like capital existed back then? Capital didn't exist back then in anything but a prototypical form, right? So this is a form of erasure, of reducing all cows to blackness really just because it's dark outside, right? That's Hegel's go-to example for how his dialectics works, right? So anyway, of course, such a procedure is unhistorical. However, precisely through the feeling of the absurd, which it awakens in us, it opens actual historical distance to us. So that's the value, the inherent value of taking the historicism, the ideological relativist approach, seriously. When people draw these comparisons, you need to go, well, okay, yeah, that's interesting, and be weirded out about it. And then dig into that weirded outness, because there's something deeper that can be opened up by going to negation, to contradiction, to irreconcilable difference, right? So, hell yeah, thank you, you two. If you both hadn't talked that out, I'm not sure it would have clicked for me, so really appreciate it. I'll read for a couple paragraphs and then hand it off to Nikki if you want to, Nikki. The speculative lack of identity. It is against this background that one has to grasp the fundamental paradox of the speculative identity as it was recently restated by Gillian Rose. Or is it Jillian? In the dialectical judgment of identity, the mark of identity between its subject and predicate designates only and precisely the specific modality of their lack of identity. Let us recall the case evoked by Rose herself, that the ultimate identity of religion and state, the Hegelian proposition that, in general, religion and the foundation of the state is one and the same thing. They are identical in and for themselves. If we read this thesis in a non-speculative way, as a description of the factual state of things, it can, of course, easily be refuted, in quotes, refuted. It applies only to theocracies, and even there, not without restraints, and so on, right? So to call the state the same thing as religion just makes absolutely no sense if you know anything about history, is what he's saying, except for in extreme theocracies. But even there's all kinds of problems with that, right? Because there's still military coups that might do things that have nothing to do with the religion except for at a very superficial level, right? A way to save its legitimacy would be, of course, to read it as a statement that concerns not facts but values, as a statement about the ought, the ideal, perfect state would be a state founded in religion, and existing states can approach this ideal only to a greater or lesser degree. So he's proposing a different way to read it, to make more use of this this argument. But I want to highlight one thing before we move on. I'm not gonna editorialize it, but I will highlight it and say we'll come back to it. It's the speculative identity part. We're gonna want to come back to speculative identity here. That will be our quilting point. Yet Hegel's point lies elsewhere. Let us take a particular state, the medieval European feudal state, for example. Although directly founded on religion, this state was, of course, far from ideal. In it, the Christian content was cruelly perverted. It found expression in a distorted way. The ultimate ground for this deficiency is not, however, to be sought in the external social circumstances which prevented the adequate and full realization of the Christian values within state institutions, but in the insufficiently articulated notion of Christian religion itself, in the church's lifeless asceticism, which is like, not enjoying things, not taking pleasure in things. Its obsession with the religious, at least not taking pleasure in like earthly delights, right? Like not taking pleasure in food, sex, wine, right? So yeah, Christian values within state institutions, but in this insufficiently articulated notion of Christian religion itself, in the church's lifeless asceticism, its obsession with the religious beyond, and its necessary reverse, the depravity of the church as social institution. According to Hegel, it was only with Protestantism that the Christian religion arrived at its truth. The deficiency is thus redoubled, reflected into itself. The inadequacy of the actual state to the Christian religion, qua its foundation, responds to and has its ground in the inadequacy of the Christian religion itself to its own notion. Therein consists the speculative identity of state and religion. In the overlap of the two lacks, in the codependence between the deficiency of the state, its lack of identity with religion, and the inherent deficiency of a determinate form of religion to which the state refers as its foundation. State and religion are thus identical per negationem. They're identical through negation. Their identity consists in the correlation of their lack of identity with the inherent deficiency of the central term that grounds their relationship, religion. Todd McGowan talks about speculative identity and a lot, and so he basically, the difference between identity as A equals A and identity as identity and difference is the difference between identity as it's normally talked about and speculative identity proper. Speculative identity is identity and difference, which is to say, identity is what it is, not just through the positive attributes that we tend to associate it to, but also what it is not. And so the determinate negation between state and religion is like almost symmetrical in this case between state and religion. So, a person critiquing this piece above, what was her name or his name? I don't know if it's a him or a she. I don't know, but the Jillian Rose. Oh yeah, herself. So Jillian Rose, had said that the ultimate identity of religion and state said that it's the same thing. Like she's basically saying it's the same thing, and then people are like, no, we've refuted you because we can show ways that they're different, and then yeah, you can refute it at that level if you want to, but Slavoj's like, no, there's actually something much more interesting here, which is that their determinate negation that they share, they both prop each other up through that in a very important way. Their identity is not just an identity in terms of similarity. People worship the state in the way that people worship the religion. The state and the religion both, function as a big other. Both of them have a bunch of laws and norms that they adjudicate. Both of them, basically everyone's lives gravitate around this. It's like, it's pretty easy to collapse the two into each other if you're only looking at similarity. No. Don't just look at similarity and reject this comparison on that basis because you found some ways that they're not similar. No, they are similar. Also in terms of their negation. So in this case, it could be that refuting Gillian Rose, refuting her, if we're thinking in terms of speculative identity, your refutations could actually serve to prop up her point. But as to what the actual, and maybe Nick, you can read from the next part on. But before that, I just want to see, do either of you have anything you'd like to expand on in terms of what is the determinate negation that is constituting state and religion? Like, how do the two not just have similarities, but what is the negation, the contradiction at work here that he's talking about?
I don't think I have anything solid, but it like I'm thinking of like the new atheist obsession with the horrors of Islam, and claiming that Islamism is an existential threat. I think that to me is kind of operating under the surface. Like, yeah, I've been to places in the world that are really fucked up and that also on the surface claim to be Islamist authoritarian states. But they're not. They're just authoritarians painted with that facade of Islam. And yeah, that's just kind of where I'm sitting right now. Like,
Right.
Rumi, you know, one of the most greatest poets ever, was, you know, part of this horrible, deplorable religion, allegedly, according to some of these new atheist types. That I went through that phase, and I think that's what kind of kicked me out of it. Was like, well, wait a minute, you can't say that. Like, you guys are saying, oh, we're cool, smart, progressive people, but then you're going to turn around and say farmers and teenage boys are bad, horrible terrorists. That's not right. Like, I think I want to think about that a lot more.
Yeah, he uses this example of the European feudal state, supposedly founded on religion, right? But in no way was it like really approximating that ideal, right? In it, the Christian content was cruelly perverted. It found expression in a distorted way, right? You'll obviously have pastors who want to be theocrats, who see themselves represented by the right wing of their state, who will say, yeah, absolutely. You know, the people who don't share our religion, who are in the government, are actually the reason for all of the problems we have today, right? You'll obviously get that. And from the opportunistic capitalist or just governing standpoint, the fascistic standpoint, when I say opportunist, I mean there's not like strong ideals there. Like, you know, Hitler doesn't appeal to and work with various factions of various religions because he holds to those ideals. No, he's just opportunistically feeding the fires of the more extremist churches while doing everything he can to suppress the more open churches, right? And so when we look at Saudi Arabia and we go, oh my God, they're fucking chopping people's heads off and torturing people and killing women and doing all this shit. It's like, that's not Islam, right? That is a billionaire family that has found it advantageous to take a specific interpretation of a text and not just, you know, billionaires themselves saying, yes, this is true. No. Funding the pieces of shit who do that, right? And suppressing the ones who have competing interpretations or, you know, big, beautiful souls like Rumi. So that's where I see what you're saying, Nance, and bringing it back into this. But then he says the ultimate ground of this deficiency, what deficiency? The way that the state was not actually Christian, is not, however, to be sought in the external social circumstances which prevented the adequate and full realization of the Christian values within the state institutions, but in the insufficiently articulated notion of Christian religion itself, in the church's lifeless asceticism, its obsession with the religious beyond, and its necessary reverse, the depravity of the church as social institution. According to Hegel, it was only with... I don't know what he's saying in this part. I think that's my issue. It's like I can follow everything else, but this is really where he loses me. So if we don't want to expand, I don't want to get stuck on this passage. But this is where I kind of get lost. So unless either of you have had an aha moment here, we can just kind of move on, because I don't think it. We at least know what he's doing. We just don't know how this section serves what he's doing. Ultimately, what he's doing is that bit about determinate negation. The two sides are mirroring each other, not just with similarities, but negation. But people watching this in the future, because we don't just do this for the live chat, do reflect on it, pause it, unpack it, give an interpretation in the comment section of the YouTube or the actual place where this is shared on the forum, because the conversation needs to go on beyond this moment in time. We're not just here in this moment in time. It's going to be worthwhile to go over this again. And then future Dave, when you're watching this, myself, what's up? Hi there. Has it clicked for you yet? All right, Nikki, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. I'll go for it. Okay. In other words, Hegel fully accepts the underlying premises of the Kantian Fichtean logic of Solon. The fact that the identity of state and religion is always realized in an incomplete, distorted way, that the relationship of the universal idea to its particular actualizations is a negative one. What is this logic of Solon? Of the infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal. Overlooks, however, is that the very series of failed attempts to embody religion in the constitution of the state presents the actuality of their speculative identity. The concrete content of this identity is the logic which regulates their lack of identity. The conceptual constraint that links the gap separating the state from its religious foundation to the inherent deficiency of this foundation itself.
What is Solon again? I think it's okay. On the upper page, it says ought, like the ought, like the obligation, the thou shalt. You need to do this. Okay.
Shall I continue, or shall we try to understand that passage?
Yeah, let's try. You want to take a crack at it?
Unfortunately, I don't think I have much to add here at this point.
I mean, Nikki, just on the real though, like most of the exegetical readings that other people have done on the site so far, they don't unpack paragraph by paragraph. We've been kind of drilling into this a bit more, because I just feel like, well, I started early enough in the morning and I've got enough time. I just had this feeling of like, if the three of us kind of drill into this shit, we're going to get a lot out of it and set a precedent. So it's kind of like a compensation for how we usually kind of would read over this. But yeah, let's do it. Just touch on it. So in other words, Hegel fully accepts the underlying premise of the Kantian Fichtean logic of Solon. Now, obviously, we both have a problem. I say we both. All three of us have a problem here. And that is, I don't think any of us could write an essay on the Kantian Fichtean logic of Solon, right? And obviously Slavoj is going to assume an audience who could. And so, Mikey, if you are watching this now or in the future, I know that you feel like the need to like really unpack everything, but if you unpack one fucking thing, like it might be this, because the other things, like, we can basically pretty easily make sense of, but what is the Kantian Fichtean logic of Solon? You know what I mean? It's like, I've read 2/3 of the Critique of Pure Reason. Driest, most boring piece of shit I've ever read. So frustrating, right? But obviously, it's an essential text, and my long-term goal is to read and reread and reread it. Fichte, I mean, I skimmed something once. It doesn't count. So I just really don't know. But anyway, so let's just kind of bracket whatever the hell that means. But it's like the Kantian Fichtean logic of the ought, which I think is just morality and the moral obligation itself, like the feeling of compulsion, like you need to do something. So in the chat, if anybody actually knows, do elaborate. I feel like Georgie probably knows. Georgie, let us know if you know. The fact that the identity of state and religion is always realized in an incomplete, distorted way, that the relationship of the universal idea to its particular actualizations is a negative one. What this logic of Solon / ought, of infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal. Oh, fuck. Well, there you go. He tells us really right there. I didn't even catch that on the first pass.
Yeah.
So Solon means the infinite approach to the ultimately attainable ideal. Why does he use the word ought in parentheses above? If that's so, here I was thinking it was just about the moral obligation or compulsion. No. Overlooks, however, is that what the logic of the infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal overlooks is that the very series of failed attempts to embody religion in the constitution of the state presents the actuality of their speculative identity. That's kind of what I was already saying earlier. The concrete content of this identity is the logic which regulates their lack of identity. The conceptual constraint that links the gap separating the state from its religious foundation to the inherent deficiency of this foundation itself.
Mm-hmm.
So Solon being the infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal, this overlooks. Right, okay. So there's a way that you can just kind of be like a mystic about knowledge and go, well, we can never actually get to identity. What he's saying is, well, then when you do that, you're not going to be able to see or really understand anything, right? The failed attempts to understand the similarities and differences between between religion and state are fundamental to understanding. So it's not enough to just say that there is this infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal, right? That's the mystic move. No, the point is you also have to pass through those failures. Without passing through those failures firsthand, not secondhand in summary form, firsthand, without those firsthand encounters with these failures, your so-called understanding of the logic of Solon is bullshit. So that would be the Hegelian critique of Kantian Fichtean sort of mystic kinds of takeaways, right? Like, oh, we can never really know. We can never really get to the things themselves, right? Well, the noumenal, it's just beyond our grasp. All we can do is know the parameters of reason, and then beyond that, it's God. God will fill in the gaps, and we'll make the leap. That's the kind of Kantian move, I think. So, okay, thank you. Now it makes sense to me. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Dope.
Shall I keep reading?
Oh, totally, yeah.
All right. So the supreme case of such a negative relationship between the universal and its particular exemplifications is, of course, the Oedipal parricide, this paradigm of the crime, this crime cat exotion, this act of, oh, okay, my thing is cutting off now. Okay, this act of, to which every human being is guilty as a being of language, since we are able to speak only under the aegis of the parental metaphor, well, let me just, I'm going to switch to the other screen, actually. Sorry for
no worries.
messing it up. Okay. of the dead, murdered father who returns as his name. Lacan's version of the cogito is accordingly, I'm guilty, therefore I am. The very existence of man, being of language, implies a fundamental guilt. And this so-called Oedipus complex is nothing but a way to avoid this guilt. The fact that, as Lacan put it, Oedipus himself had no Oedipus complex means precisely that he went to the extreme, to the utmost limit of human destiny, and fully assumed his guilt. The relationship of particular actual crimes to this crime par excellence is radically ambiguous. By means of assuming responsibility for a particular crime, the subject endeavors to blot out this guilt that stains his very existence. Right. I find that quite straightforward, but maybe other people might not find that quite straightforward. So maybe there's a good way to.
So basically, what is it saying?
Yeah. So let's see here. So I think he's also trying to get at what he was talking about in the previous paragraph, and that part of, I think that's the part that I want to clarify for my understanding of what exactly, I think we did kind of get at it, of what the previous paragraph meant, but in essence, Solon, this logic of Solon is the infinite approach to the ultimately unattainable ideal. And, in the religion and constitution of the state, the kind of political religious spectrum, it over that kind of logic of Solon overlooks the failed attempts to embody religion in the constitution of the state. And that presents the actuality of their speculative identity, the concrete content. So for this specific paragraph, I'm interested to see how that exactly relates. I think it might be with the part after that of this identity is the logic which regulates their lack of identity. Okay. So now the issue with the supreme case is such a negative relationship, probably one that has I'm just trying to see where Žižek is exactly linking this with the previous paragraph. That's usually how I try to understand the next one. They usually have some sort of flow. So the supreme case is such a negative relationship between a universal and its particular exemplifications. Okay, it's of course the Oedipal parasite, this paradigm of the crime. So basically that Oedipus himself, as like the representation of I guess the universal of what the Oedipus complex would be, as right. Oedipus himself didn't actually have that same issue because he was able to, through that negative relationship, he was the extreme version, and that extreme version created that negative relationship that I was able to help him, I guess, overcome that issue of the Oedipus complex. And I think that that's kind of what he's trying to get at here. So Nikki. Basically, let me try to find an example. So Lacan's version of the cogito. So the so-called Oedipus complex is nothing but a way to avoid this guilt. So the Oedipus himself had no Oedipus complex means precisely that he went to the extreme, to the most limit of human destiny, and fully assumed his guilt. So by fully assuming his guilt, he's fully assuming that negation, and then creating something else for himself, that he doesn't have to be stuck in that Oedipus complex, even though he is an exemplification of that, which is quite interesting. Let's see, the relationship in particular of the actual crime to his crime. So why does that relate with the previous things that are being said now? That's my process, is trying to understand that. So by assuming responsibility for a particular crime, the subject endeavors to blot out the guilt that stains his very existence.
In the chat, Dan suggested something, because you're asking about the tie-in to the previous paragraph, and so the Dan, I think, has maybe nailed it, which is I'm guilty, therefore I am. I failed to embody religion, therefore I am the state. Right? That's this, right? So I think that's probably the hook or the connection, but which is good. I was not getting that. But for the Oedipus complex, I'm just trying to think. Okay, so the Oedipal parasite. He kills his dad, but he doesn't even know it was his dad, right? Isn't that what it was? Like,
Yeah.
And then he fucks his mom, even though his whole life he tried not to, because he had heard a prophecy that he would, so he was terrified of that prospect. But then accidentally it happens, like, because he didn't know who she was. And so but that's not what Freud does with the Oedipus complex, right? And then Lacan does something else with it still, which is to kind of make it symbolic and not like literal. A lot of ways of interpreting Freud like make it literal. So Lacan's version of the cogitos, accordingly, I'm guilty, therefore I am, the very existence of man qua being of language implies a fundamental guilt, and the so-called Oedipus complex is nothing but a way to avoid this guilt. What does that mean, though?
I think it's a negation of that guilt, right? So like it's almost like by having that Oedipus complex, you're actually kind of addressing the fact that like you're accepting it, and by accepting it, it kind of I don't know, maybe it's something to do with that.
So the original guilt is just so okay, because the Oedipus complex has to do with like, doesn't it have to do with like castration, like which comes from the fact that you just can't be with your mom forever, like we all get weaned at some point, which means we get severed from the breast, right? Or the primary caretaker in the bottle. Like we get severed from that immediacy of comfort, and in this kind of mythical or symbolic rendition of it, it's the father figure who steps in and says, okay, grow up, kid. You can't keep sucking on that. But obviously for Lacan, this is a symbolic function, so it doesn't have to be a real dad. It could be the fact that mom has to go to work and she says, oh, I've got to go to work. But the point is the kid's desire is being thwarted by a prohibition, a lack is introduced, and an appeal is being made to some big other, some authority. I have to go to work. So the mother isn't just like, I'm done with you, kid. No, the mother says, I can't give you everything you want because I have to do these other things. So the mother is introducing the reality principle by appeal to, oh, well, your dad said so. Or, oh, I have to go to work. I have to go work for the man. In any of these cases, a child is going to develop a sort of complex about this, right? So, but what I'm curious about is, well, how does what's the original guilt thing? I just don't really get that.
The original guilt.
Just you're guilty as a being of language? We're only able to speak under the aegis. What is an aegis? I don't even know what an
Maybe
aegis.
let's read the next paragraph and see if it becomes clear. Because I think that he talks about at first a notorious sentiment of guilt. So maybe.
Good idea.
I'll go for it. Okay. The notorious sentiment of guilt is therefore nothing but sorry. Do you mind actually scrolling down a bit? Mine's a bit cut off. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, great. So the notorious sentiment of guilt is therefore nothing but a stratagem to deceive the big other, to divert its attention from the real crime. Therein consists the negative relationship between the universal and the particular. The particular crime here is the particular crime is here in order to conceal the universality of crime, cat exochen, there is a dialectical tension between the universal and the particular. The particular disavows and subverts the universal, whose exemplification it is. As to the status of the universal, Lacan is therefore not a nominalist, but definitely a realist. Look, universal is real, not the pacifying medium that unites diverging particularities, but the unfathomable limit that prevents the particular from achieving identity with itself. And it is precisely in the light of this paradox that it becomes manifest how everything turns on grasping and expressing the true. The entire content of the substance consists in the series of failed, distorted ways the substance misrecognizes itself.
Very attentively and checking the chat. So, but yeah, let's try to put this paragraph in its own words and kind of reread sections of it and do the whole thing. Both of you, I trust you. You've got this. I'll be right back.
Thanks. Hey, hello. How are you doing, Nance?
Oh, I am enjoying that lost feeling I talked about earlier.
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely something that's right there, you know. Like the part that frustrates me is that I understand quite a bit, but then like the feeling of understanding is kind of fleeting as well, right? And it's kind of like this thing that I can't really fully grasp, and it's like, oh, it's like almost like, I don't know, like what's a good analogy? I don't know. You're trying to grasp maybe like an animal and it's covered in oil, and then it keeps slipping away, and it's like, oh, I almost got it. Almost got it. And then, oh no, it's gone. No. And then, oh, is this even good enough? And then your brain starts overthinking. That's a neurosis that we all have, right? Ford is right. Anyway, I can take a stab at it first, and I would definitely want to hear your stab at it as well too, because I think that this is really interesting. So he starts this paragraph here. The notorious sentiment of guilt is therefore nothing but a stratagem to deceive the big other, to divert its attention from the real, what is that word there?
Crime.
Real crime, right? And the crime, what's a real crime? Like that you want to have sex with your mother. Is that the real crime? I would assume.
I don't know if it's that or if it's universal crime. That I think that's where I'm.
Maybe the feeling, I think it's actually crime as a notion of like the, you know, like the big others like gaze on you, right? And the crime is like a notion of like, it only exists if there's an authority to uphold it, and the authority can be like likened to what we have said even before, the name of the father, which also is bureaucracy, government, society, other people, the father, it's the actual father, God, Jesus, whatever, right? So I think like crime here probably means the feeling of doing wrong in the eyes of the authority. And so, and you know, like Žižek will say like very clearly, there is no big other, right? But you know, we're not really there at that point. But I think this first sentence is interesting because I think it's talking about the idea of feeling guilt as ascribed by the big other gazing onto you, and the feeling of judgment from the big other's gaze onto you, right? And that's also can be the same thing as the father, you know, the name of the father, that symbolic order, symbolic authority, right? And I think that that's kind of the direction that this is getting into. So it's saying that this sentiment of guilt is actually, and I think Žižek even talks about this, about how like kind of feeling sad for yourself can have a form of, you can get a form of jouissance from it, I believe was the term, right? So so basically he's even saying here, it's almost like a negation of that. It's saying like by feeling guilty for your crimes, it's like you're actually deceiving the big other by saying that like, oh, I abide by your rule, I will be I will concede to you and just leave me alone, you know? And it's kind of like with the Oedipus complex, it's like to your father, it's like, okay, I will grow up, I will stop like being infantilizing, you know, myself and, you know, whatever thing. I don't worry, father, I'll grow up and do whatever, right? So I think it's kind of like, you're diverting the attention from the real crime. What's the real crime? The real crime, so therein consists a negative relationship between the universal and the particular. The particular crime is here in order to conceal the universality of crime. Cat exochen. What's cat exochen? I don't know, actually. Putting a little bookmark on that, mentally. There's a dialectical tension between the universal and the particular. The particular disavows and subverts the universal, whose exemplification it is. So as to the status of the universal, Lacan is therefore not a nominalist, but definitely a realist. Universal is real, not the pacifying medium that unites or diverging particularities, but the unfathomable limit that prevents the particular from achieving identity with itself. So maybe I think the particular crime is actually the notion of that upholding of the universal, and that being upheld by the big other, as the also symbolization of authority. But there's a bit more particularities, in that actual thing, and how precisely it is precisely in the light of this paradox it becomes manifest of how everything turns on grasping and expressing the true, not only as substance but equally as subject. The entire content of the substance consists in a series of failed distorted ways the substance misrecognizes itself. So it's kind of like this last sentence actually illustrates as well too, because it's saying the substance misrecognizes itself. So the substance is actually probably misrecognizing itself as the universal. That's probably what the misidentification is. That's my gander at it. And to put this to the previous paragraph, that's going to be more difficult. I still don't know what cat exochen means.
So apparently it means par excellence.
What does that really mean here either? Too.
So go, Nance.
Go for it.
Par excellence. I mean, like the paradigm, or not like the paragon, like the highest example of maybe, no?
So then to reread that, the particular crime is here in order to conceal the universality of crime par excellence, right? So what is the universality of, so I feel like this is what you remember in the last chapter when you were doing an exegetical reading with Jordan, and your brain, Nance, you said, I can't stop going back to chapter 1 and the founding crime that, the crime that founds law, right? I think that's what he's referring to here.
That's what I was thinking. And then like we take on this personal guilt for these particular crimes to kind of cover that, because we'd rather feel guilty and play along with the game than realize the horror of, oh my gosh, it is the violence and the brutality and the blood and the it's not Law and Order. It's not going to Starbucks and having a nice coffee and a polite conversation. Like that is the universal crime.
So let's talk.
But we can entertain the narrative that, oh,
I like this a lot. I connecting what you just said to what Nikki said kind of quilts it for me. So using a father figure is useful here, because the big other likes to have a personified manifestation, right? Like the symbolic order, he talked about it in the last chapter. The symbolic order is embodied by an irrationality, the actual physical object of a person's body. Like it actually requires a king to quilt the symbolic order. The king, but that's not a deception. It's actually the inherent rationality, the kernel of the rational order, which is also a legal system founded on an original crime. The original crime being well, there's probably an enclosure of the commons, there's probably colonialism and subjugation and enslavement of original inhabitants of the domain that have now been made into subsidiaries, servants, slaves of the ruling class that's moved into the area, whatever, right? So in traditional societies, you go, oh, here's a king and a queen and a royal family and a bunch of other like lords and knights, and okay, yeah, but where do they get their titles? Oh, from a legal system. The legal system gives it, and the legal system is based in an appeal to religion. And you know, in this, you know, John Locke had to deconstruct this when he's writing his first treatise on government. He had to deconstruct the divine right of kings, because the King of England, literally, they had like this lineage that traced the king's ancestors all the way back to the first man. That this divine right of kings was this religious appeal to why he's actually king, when in reality the reason that he's king was because someone at some point won a war, right? And so that winning the war was the original crime, because you had to subjugate a lot of peace-loving, harmless farmers who and hunter-gatherer tribes that were just trying to have their little anarchistic existence. And then came along this ruling order and said, no, bitch, we're going to run this show. And you're going to pay taxes and tributes, and you're going to be a slave, and you can't go where you want to go, and you're going to have to do what you're going to do. And so now, obviously, we don't think about this within its historical context. Now, psychologically, though, yes, we have like this sense of guilt because of prohibition. We've been told not to do things. We're divided by language. We're the split subject. We don't always know what we do, and we can feel guilty for things that we've done. And so tying it back to Nikki says that's like this performance you're doing for yourself, but it's really for the big other. Whether you're trying to convince your dad, whether you're trying to convince your masculine parental authority who might not be a father, or whether you're trying to appease your boss or the king or any sort of authority, or if it's just purely symbolic, there's just this sense that society's judging you, and so you feel guilty. The point is that this is a performance that you could call it fetishization in the Marxist sense. What you're doing is you're taking something that you're experiencing as the thing itself, and you're forgetting about this context and relation that's operative. What is the context and relation that's operative? You're actually simping for a criminal. You're simping for a tyrant. Oh, I prostrate myself before the king. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so humble. Why? So that you don't have to, so you can appease him? Who the fuck is he? He's subjugating you. Okay, so maybe that's what's going on, but that's definitely seems to be kind of, for me, what would connect it to the founding crime in the previous chapter, which connects us to the king in the second chapter. And I definitely didn't get any of that from the first reading today, much less the first reading when I first read this a few months ago. So I'm glad we dug into it. We basically can go for like, let's each read a paragraph and then have a little conversation where we try to quilt it all together, and then I got to bounce. And the two of you are definitely welcome to continue. I know that at least Nance has the recording software to, if you both want to go longer and harder or continue it later today after you've had a break. I definitely want to encourage you both to get in the DMs with one another, because I want you to feel comfortable doing this without me, because I'll hog air like I do. So... But yeah, which one of you would like to read next, or shall I?
I'm happy to do it, unless,
Yeah, go for
unless Nance, you want to. All right, I'll continue. Okay, great. So, the best remedy against the misapprehension of the Hegelian thesis on substance as subject is to rely on the everyday commonsensical notion of the subjective, as when we say of some opinion that it represents a subjective, distorted, partial view of the thing in itself or thing in question. The substance of subject means also that non-truth, error, is inherent to truth itself. To resume Rose's perispecificacious formula, that substance is untrue as subject. This is, again, what the speculative identity of substance and subject means. Their very lack of identity. That is to say, the way their non-identity, the gap separating the subject from the substance, is strictly correlative to the inherent non-identity, split of the subject or of the substance itself. What better way to exemplify this speculative non-identity of substance and subject than to refer again to Kafka's parable on the door of the law from his trial, to the position of the man of the country, or man from the country, subject who finds himself impotent and null in front of the impenetrable palace of law. Substance, ? It is as if the following passage from Hegel's Phenomenology was written as a kind of comment avant la lettre on Kafka's parable. The disparity which exists in consciousness between the I and the substance, which is its object, and the distinction between them, the negative in general. This can be regarded as a defect of both, though it is their soul, or that which moves them. Now, although this negative appears as first as a disparity between the I and its object, it is just as much the disparity of the subject with itself. Thus, what seems to happen outside of it, to be an activity directed against it, is really its own doing, and substance shows itself to be essentially subject. Should we stop here? Should I keep going?
I'm definitely like lost, but let's.
Magnificent palace of the law fails to notice that his externality to the substance, the disparity between him and the substance, is always already the disparity of the substance with itself. His gaze, which perceives the substance, the palace of law, from outside as the unattainable transcendent mystery, is simultaneously the gaze by means of which
Everything we've read in this go. Yeah.
To explain this paradoxical short circuit between externality and internal self-relationship of the substance perspective, from the subject's forgetting to include his own gaze in the picture. Let us recall the enigmatic Sarah from John Fowles' The French Lieutenant's Woman, the social outcast stigmatized by her sinful past, who fully enjoys her suffering. It is not sufficient to say that her enigma fascinates the novel's male hero. What one has to do is to accomplish a decisive step further and ascertain that her enigma is staged in order to fascinate the hero's gaze. A similar strategy must be adopted apropos of Kafka's enigmatic and horrifying agency of power, the court, the castle. Its entire spectacle is staged in order to fascinate the gaze of those who endeavor in vain to penetrate its mystery. The horrifying and imposing edifice of power, totally indifferent toward the miserable individual, feigns this indifference in order to attract his gaze. Insofar as Sarah is a hysteric who builds up her fantasy of the French lieutenant so that her desire is sustained as unsatisfied, she staged his theater to attract the gaze of the bystanders, taking a lone walk in a state of oblivious trance on the cob in stormy weather, and reckoning upon the fact that her lone trance will be noticed.
I love that Nance keeps saying that he likes the feeling of not knowing what's going on and feeling overwhelmed, because it's like, first of all, I do believe that that is the jouissance of reading a difficult text. The pleasure of reading a difficult text is the aha moment when it makes sense, but the jouissance that builds up is the feeling of frustration of not understanding what's going on. And if you don't like sobriety because it's boring, if you don't like sobriety because you got some bullshit you got to live with and deal with every day, then there's various ways of developing outlets for partial jouissance for our drive that are extremely self-destructive, but at least give us relief from that immediacy. And theory's like the least harmful. I mean, you can't have a career out of it. You really can't. And so that's like, you know, the most self-undermining thing about it is people will think that you're wasting your time, but it definitely takes you out of your immediacy in like the least harmful way. And there's arguably other benefits to it as well. I just wanted to kind of bring it into this kind of contrast with jouissance, and you know, it's a replacement for like other drugs. It's a kind of drug, and the buildup of not understanding is the itch of needing the relief of the substance. The aha moment is the pleasure. That's when you, yeah, right. So that's when you actually inject or snort or smoke. So basically, like you know, if you're just like really looped in on like, I just want to smoke, and you just want it more and more and more and more. That's the jouissance. You think that what you want is the pleasure of getting it, but the jouissance is the not getting it. You're getting jouissance from drive thwarting the thing that you're desiring, right? But once you achieve the thing that you're desiring, it doesn't actually last. And then, so anyway, drive and jouissance is the I want it. Or, you know, if to bring it to like gambling, it's not the actual moment of winning when you're gambling. It's all of the stress that led up to gambling. It's the fantasy of winning, running up into the real of just like you're constantly losing money, you're budgeting, but you're fucking failing. And then you're like, well, I'm still going to go blow a bunch of money on gambling, right? Like, so there's all these ways that this is starting to crystallize for me in a way that's useful for all of us. Anyone who's an underground theorist is obviously going to be surrounded by drug addiction today. Anybody who's an underground theorist is going to be surrounded by shopaholics, at least if you're in the middle class, I guess. I don't know that there's a lot of shopaholics in actual poverty, but we all know people who can't afford things and just keep buying shit. Like, you just bought a third one of those and you didn't even need it. Like, what? You're totally fucked right now. And it's just drive foils desire, but the acquisition of the supposedly desired object, this short-lasting sense of pleasure, is the relief that comes after jouissance has built up for a long time. And so, anyway, feeling lost in this text and learning to love feeling lost is the most important part of loving the process. Because with theory, being confused is like first, right? And then the aha moment is second. So that's my little speech on it. It's formulating. It's been crystallizing for the last like few years in conversations with Mikey. Like, what is it that we are so addicted to here? And I'm going to, because I don't have time to we can't really read any further. And we can't even really unpack this because I really do have to close out the stream. I kind of wanted to just focus on something that Nance had said and then something that Nikki had said that I feel is almost more important, which is it's about the process itself. And you're talking about the slippery beast, right? Like the oiled up animal that you're trying to catch here, Nikki, right? Like you understand it when you read it, but then once you hystericize yourself, because that's what the exegetical reading does, is it forces you to hystericize yourself and go, okay, but what is that? Let me put that in my own words. And then you're like, I understood it a second ago. Now I'm at a loss. What just happened? I just lost the fish, right? Whoop, it's gone. That is something that most people avoid. 99% of people doing theory in the world today do not do exegetical readings. Someone like Dr. Ian Thompson at University of New Mexico, when he teaches Being in Time, because I sat in on a class one session, and because I was just visiting New Mexico, Albuquerque, he comes in with the book, puts it down, and he basically does exegetical readings of sections. And that's his whole approach. And it's just awesome. But he's been studying that text his whole life. Same as his mentor, Hubert Dreyfus. Same as David Harvey is with Capital or the Grundrisse, right? And so that's their little wheelhouse of expertise. But here we are realizing firsthand how much we've duped ourselves into thinking we understood something. And that is probably the most powerful piece of function of what's happening when we do these exegetical readings, because we thought we understood, and then we go, but I don't know how to put that in my own words. And then after struggling through it, you might be able to have some aha moment, right? So there's that being placed outside and lost in the way that Nance has become addicted to. And then you might actually get your aha moment, whether other people do or not, who knows. But the other thing that comes from that is you start to see, shit, everybody else seems to think that they understand this shit as well. But they're not doing exegetical readings. They haven't written anything that I can read that actually does line-by-line analysis. So when they make these authoritative pronouncements on theory works this way and so says this, and when so-and-so says this, that's like when this other person says that, and they're scatting. They're scatting, they're free associating, they are doing theory poetry. That's most of Theorygram. That's most of TheoryTube. That's most of Theory Twitch. It's most of Theory Twitter. But it's also most of academia. It's most of the PMC. It's crazy to me, and becoming more and more obvious all the time. How long was I duping myself thinking that I was understanding this bullshit? I wasn't. And so that's part of the turn back to becoming a student. Because when I started my media career as Theory Plebe, I was, I'm going to be an influencer. I've already got a master's. I've just about got a master's in this. It was part of my master's. I've just about got a master's in this. So I'll teach the working class theory. And a couple years later, I'm like, I need to go back to the student stage. I need to actually be unsure, because what I thought I understood, I didn't understand. And so to bring it all back to, quilt it by bringing it back to the lecture last night for They Know Not What They Do, and Mikey, his radical thing that breaks sophomorism in me and us, I think, is the Mikey standard that Adam had referenced as the Mikey standard. You don't understand it if you can't put it in your own words without references to other thinkers or concepts. And what was the other aspect of that? It was the one that Adam actually brought up. I was just, here, let me. You don't understand the thing if you can't put it in your own words with examples. Oh, and not just with comparison, but specifically with contrast. Right? So if you can't, comparing and not contrasting, that's the sophomoric move. Now the sophomore is making up for imposter syndrome, which we all feel. We all feel it every day. If anyone doesn't feel it, I'd like them to announce themselves, because so far everyone I've met suffers from imposter syndrome when doing theory. So what do you do in grad school? You learn how to fake it until you make it. But the thing is if you fake it till you make it by name dropping and associating to other concepts and thinkers and always just drawing comparisons and never really drilling into contrast, then basically the only way you got out of imposter syndrome was by becoming a charlatan who knows how to say the things that one says to stay safely in your lane, which maintains discursive Taylorism, which is the main function of the PMC, discursive Taylorism, right? Oh, you have your lane, I have my lane, we'll all stay in our lanes. None of us will really question the actual lanes themselves. And so this is a sort of general theory that ties together all the courses in Theory Underground right now as a sort of not just teaching style, but specifically as a learning style, as a learning approach. So Mikey's number one thing that he did was hystericize me. Whenever I'd be like, oh, well, that's like Heidegger, or that's like Levinas, when they say this or that. And he goes, no, it's not. How's it different? Like, you'll notice chapter 2 of Waypoint, my first book, like, all I do is talk about a way that I can make Levinas and Heidegger work together so that we can see something. You'll notice there's like 2 sentences of me acknowledging their irreconcilable differences, and that's only because Mikey had hystericized me after I'd already written it. But if I was to do it again, I would actually have to go back over their main works, and then I would have to basically write a giant thing about how they're not relatable before I can also productively use them in relation to one another. And so that's kind of why I'm like, yeah, no, I'm signed up for being a student for the next 20 years, because kind of it's like street cred, bragging rights. We get to say, well, at least we know that we don't know. And every time we think we understand, we then try to put it in our own words and not use recourse to comparisons to other outside thinkers or texts or concepts. No, we stick with the subject in the matter at hand and try to read it on its own terms, put it in our own words, and explain it in a way that could make sense to somebody who doesn't know what the fuck is going on, right? Assuming an audience like the person on the bar stool, who's kind of drunk, and then they go, well, what is jouissance? And you're like, fuck, That's why I hold Mikey to this crazy level. And that's why the Dangerous Maybe blog is not just a blog. It's like the number one source for looking to who out there is doing this style, who out there has really like honed this practice. Well, he did. And so that's why I don't just simp for him. I'm allowing myself to be duped by him. I'm allowing myself to be duped that he is the subject supposed to know. Because if I don't allow myself to be duped, then I'm not going to get better as a student, right? And I'll just end up being duped anyway, right? That's Lacan's whole point about the non-duper. So, it's fucking crazy though. It's all tied up with thinking about things dialectically and emphasizing contradiction, because the Fichtean approach and the stereotypical Hegelian approach, all cows are black. Oh no, it's just fucking nighttime. You're just seeing similarity everywhere. That's almost all philosophy and theory today, which is a disgrace. But it's not just all philosophy and theory, it's also almost every ideological worldview salesman today. So I hope that you two will do some more exegetical readings from this text in the next week while I'm on vacation in Guadalajara. I desperately need to recoup some energy, and that's why I woke up this morning at 5 a.m. and started prepping for this, was because I was like, you know what? Final expenditure. Let's see if I pass out. This was like just like everything on the line. And it was really rewarding, and I really appreciate you both for making it. I appreciate everybody in the chat for being here. Adam Mad says, Plebe doesn't just simp for Mikey, winky face. It's true. But yes, Secret Agent Dan, we must contrast as well as compare. But the point is because everyone is always focused on comparing, we have to do a compensatory measure. We have to compensate by going hard in the opposite direction. What Lenin, who was borrowing from Aristotle, called bending the bow, which is when you have a crooked stick and you want to straighten it out, you don't just put a book on it flat, you actually have to bend it in the opposite direction, right? And the mentality of the beautiful soul, or of the child, or of the sophomore, is just to see comparison. And so we all have to go through this stage. I'm not done with this stage yet. For me, realizing dialectics is contradiction first and looking for the irreconcilable negation that determinately makes a thing what it is has been a growing epiphany. And so this is all just my own self-criticism. And that's anyway. So thank you for coming to this, everybody, and make sure to get into the part of the forum that's called group exegetical readings, so that you can share your deets with other people. Hey, say for instance, I recommend going in there today. Adam, Nance, Nikki, you're all here right now. Dan, if you want to do it too, just go in there right now and say, I would be available in these windows of time in the next 3 to 5 days. Who else is available during these windows of time and wants to actually do it? And Adam made a good point last night, which was that you don't have to record it, but for the street cred that you'll get from me, you do. So it's kind of like Jesus said, praying in public is hypocritical. Like, you shouldn't be making a show of it. I take the opposite standpoint, which is everyone reads in private and doesn't show it. So for me, it's just, it doesn't exist unless I see it. I don't believe that anyone on the internet has ever read anything until they teach a course on it where they make constant recourse to the text itself. Otherwise, I'm not convinced. This is just a spectacle, right? So thank you both for being two of the first people that I've ever actually seen reading. I think you did a really good job today. Do any of you want to say goodbye or any closing thoughts?
So I want to say thank you. Thank you for Dave for including me. Seriously. Absolutely. And I really appreciate this. I've gotten a lot from this. I got a lot from the course, from Mikey, from everyone, from this experience even today. Like, thank you so much. I hope to do more of this together, and I hope that we can encourage everyone else to learn in a way that's the most efficient as well. And I think that this is not just efficient, but actually the way to really understand things.
Yeah, I think this is an addiction, but I think it's like a life-saving addiction. I think without all the opportunities to kind of grow and be where I want to be, I love it. It's awesome.
Hell yeah, I'm going to close out by playing the US tour ad. If you are involved in Theory Underground as a viewer, as a student, as a fellow traveler, as a newbie, or as a person who's been around for years, you'll want to link up with the tour of the US this fall. I will be a newlywed. I will have been just coming back from my honeymoon. I will be pushing several books that are published by Theory Underground. I'll be publishing a new book by me, a new book by Mikey, and Underground Theory Volume 1, which is, it's almost already completely put together. Underground Volume 2 will be next year, and a lot of people's final projects from this year are going to be going towards Underground Volume 2. And so, but the last thing that I wanted to say here before I roll the ad and go private in the chat here with Nikki and Nance is just that, come on, internet. Sorry, it's really been slogging down. In the chat, I explained it to, I think it has to do with Anne woke up and then she started using the internet. And so it started buffering on the side of the viewers. And so I'm sorry, everybody. But I'm trying to award Nikki her first real achievement. Everyone gets an achievement on the website for registering. That's automatic. And if you go to your profile you'll actually see it. But if you go to your profile, you look under your profile picture, you see what achievements you have. And there's not a lot of achievements right now because everybody else who uses a software awards clicks, awards quick responses, and the point of the forum is to counteract the hot culture of immediate takes that the attention economy cultivates in us all, right? That we all have gone through the algorithm stage, as I say in one of those Substack posts on media theory. we've gone through the algorithm stage, and now we all have like this unique relation to the attention economy. So the forum isn't to break that, but it is to kind of counter it. It's to be slower, longer lasting, something people can think about longer before responding to. So I don't incentivize quick responses. What I incentivize is this kind of work. Like, because what you did today was harder than what you'll probably do in the next few days until you do it again. So I think that as of now, I'm going to go ahead and pull it up here on the screen. I think Nikki now has the achievement. Let's go to the front page of theoryunderground.com. Can you all see this on the screen? Okay, it's loading. Look at that.
Wow. Thank you. Woo!
Good job.
Thank you.
Actually,
Thank you. Should I bow? Should I bow? I don't.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, yeah!
Cool. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, talk to you later. Peace.
Bye.
In an attempt to bring in new people to the world of philosophy and theory while building on relationships already established, we are doing a countrywide tour of the United States this fall.
What's up, guys? It's Ann and
Are we coming
Dave.
to a city or town near you? Do you think there is a venue or audience in your local region that would be interested in a lecture or facilitated discussion about existentialism, critiques of therapism, PMC ideology, self-help, introduction to philosophy, or the time-energy critique of any of those things? This speaking and discussion facilitation tour will include the Pacific Northwest in mid-August, the Kansas City, Missouri area late August or early September, Philadelphia at the beginning of October, and really we're going to be all over the area there, hopefully, so get in contact with us if you think that we should come visit your state. Phoenix, Arizona, mid-October, and SoCal, especially San Diego, late October. I say especially San Diego because we already have our guide for the San Diego region. What's the difference between a host, a guide, and a volunteer, you ask? Well, thanks for actually. Volunteer role is for people who want to put up posters or in other ways promote the events that will be occurring in their town or city. Whereas the host might have a guest bedroom, guest house, or a place that we can park our van so that we can sleep in our van. We need to know if you would have like bathroom facilities or anything like that. And so the form on the website is where you can tell us what you have to offer. Guiding, on the other hand, though, people who love to guide take a lot of pride in their local knowledge. A good example of that would be Michael Downs when I visited him in Raytown, Missouri, and he took me into Kansas and to all these other landmark places from his life growing up there. But a more recent example would be my friend Michael in Poland, who took us around Katowice, Poland, and basically gives a historical and sociological analysis of everything, and it was amazing. It was one of the coolest things we've ever experienced, and it made us realize some people just want to provide the space and privacy, whereas other people want to take you out and show you around. And so if you're interested in being a volunteer, host, or guide, we have a special form for that. So please fill out your information and get in contact with us as soon as possible so we can fit you into the schedule, because we'll love to meet you, touch base with the local community. And if you don't think anyone else in your area is interested in the things that you're interested in, if you don't think anyone else is into this stuff, well, we might be able to surprise you.
When I saw that poster, Boulder Art in Boise, fucking Idaho, are you kidding me? It was virtually an answer to an unspoken prayer, really was. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was interested in the things that I was interested in, that I had been interested in for years and had kind of given up on in futility. I'd labored in solitude for so long. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to bounce ideas off.
This tour is going to bring together a lot of people who want to be based in text with the people they're in conversation with. And yeah, I think it's going to be a fantastic year. The only other thing that I want to say is that Michael Downs' first book is going to be published by Theory Underground really soon here. I've got another book coming out really soon here. These books will be spread throughout the United States on this tour. So I'm hoping to be able to do some actual book launch events at various bookstores. Outside of that, I guess the last thing that I would say is that Michael Downs is gearing up to teach For They Know Not What They Do by Slavoj Žižek. We're putting out all these introduction videos and other interviews related to the topic of Hegel, Lacan, Žižek, because we want to give people an accessible and sturdy basis in the discourse. The problem is that Michael Downs is very busy having to work at a wage slave job. And so if you want to help in freeing Mikey, make sure to go to his Patreon at patreon.com/thedangerousbaby and make a donation. Thank you. I would be remiss to close this out without a quick shout out to our patrons and our anonymous donors. Thank you so much for the donations already. We've only been around for a month. We already got over $3,000 in donations. And so thank you. And stay tuned for the app, which is on its way. There will be a Theory Underground app. So the current setup is that it is a social media site built around courses where you can suppose that people who are involved in the discussions have a shared interest in the same or similar texts, and where you can assume in a lot of the discussions that, yeah, people have read the stuff that you're reading, that you're bringing into dialogue. And so, for instance, The Idea of the University by Carl Jaspers, dedicated for him. Slavoj Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do, dedicated for him. And then as people take the course over the years, new people will be coming into that forum. And so if you get in there early, you'll be able to see how the conversation evolves. And as new people add into the conversation, it'll bring back memories and like things that you want to work through, questions that you had with the first time that you read the text. And so I'm really excited for this. The reason I've built this website is because I think that this is what's lacking in so many other spaces, is that ability to return, to be able to communicate after the fact and in a sustained way on a platform that's not attention grabby and annoying like Discord. And so stay tuned because there is an app on the way. Thank you to our donors. If you want to donate, go to theory-underground.com/support. Thank you.